In this lesson, all we're going to do is create a non-Angular specific piece of code to actually introduce you to TypeScript classes. Everything in this course will be written in TypeScript. Do not worry if you are unfamiliar with TypeScript, because TypeScript is actually fairly simple. So let's assume that we have a shopping list. So what we're going to do is create a function called shopping list. Inside of here, we might do this.groceries, and we can just initialize that to a simple array. Now, if we wanted to create an instance of this, we could do var mylist equals new shopping list. So this then treats the function shopping list as a constructor function, and inside the constructor, we have an array of groceries. Now, if we wanted to add a public method to this actual shopping list object, we can use something called the prototype. So we're going to create a function called addItem, and that is just also going to be a function. The item that we're going to add is going to be passed in via a function argument. So inside of here, what we can do is do this.groceries. So we're going to actually reference the array above, and all we're going to do is simply do this.groceries.concat. And all we're going to do in here is actually concatenate the item. So this is in fact an immutable way of doing it. If you're used to normal JavaScript, what you might actually do is something like push, and then you'll push the particular item into that piece of code. This is a way that we can do this immutably, which Angular actually favors because it makes change detection much easier. So when we start thinking about immutable objects and immutability, this is how we should typically do it with an immutable state. So let's go ahead and go down here and say my list, and we're going to add an item to our shopping list. So we'll just simply add a banana, and what we'll do is console log, and we'll do my list.groceries. So because the groceries is a property inside the constructor, all we're doing when we call addItem is actually passing in the banana, and we're going to simply log this out, and we're going to check this out in the browser real quick. So in the console, we have a couple of logs. Some of them are actually hot module replacement, which is what is part of our Webpack setup to look at our changes. The part that's actually important is this array here. So you can see it's just an array with a banana inside. If we click on this, we can actually see that the console log is coming from our groceries. So let's go back and add another method to our shopping list. The next thing we can add to our shopping list is another prototype method, and this time we're going to call it removeItem. So all we're going to do is simply remove it from an array. Now again, we're going to pass the item in, and this time we're going to do this.groceries, and then again we're going to use an immutable method. So we're going to do this.groceries, and then we're going to use .filter. So filter will actually iterate over the groceries, and here we'll get each individual grocery. Now inside of here, to be passed back to our initial groceries array, the actual grocery has to pass a specific test. So all we need to do is say return item does not equal the grocery. So all this is doing is simply iterating over the groceries. We're checking that the item that's passed in, which will be a string, is not equal to the current string. So this really is checking that banana does not equal banana. If it is, it will not return it to the groceries because filter actually returns a new array, and we'll just simply bind it here. We can clone this and change this to removeItem. So we'll go down and we'll do another console log just to see this. What we'll actually do is clone this again and change this to apple. So we should see banana and then apple, and then in this groceries we should see both of them. Then we're going to call remove, and then we'll have a console log with the grocery list. So at the end we should just see the words apple in our final array. So we have our array. The first function call is adding the banana, the second one is adding the apple, then our third function call is actually calling the removeItem. So we have the apple in this array. Banana has now disappeared because it did not match the return statement from the actual filter method that we just implemented. So what we're going to do now is go back to the code and actually rewrite this in what we call an ES6 class or an ES2015. And this is essentially what we'll be using throughout this project to create Angular components and services, So this is basically a refresher session if you're not used to TypeScript classes on how to actually write TypeScript classes. So underneath, what we'll do is create class and we'll call it shopping list 2. Now a class has just 2 opening brackets. It doesn't have a function call such as this. So all we do inside of here is specify a constructor. So inside of here, we can do this.groceries equals that array. Now you can see here that we have this.groceries with a red underline. So it says property groceries does not exist on type shopping list 2. So that actually means that we have to add a property, and you can see I'm not doing this.groceries. I'm actually just declaring the fact that I'm using something called groceries here. And all we need to do is say that it's going to be an array. Our groceries is a string and it's an array. So if you're not used to TypeScript, this is your first introduction to how to actually add types to specific things. This will help you improve and write better JavaScript. And all we're doing here is saying we have an array of strings. So this is basically telling TypeScript that it should pick up on any errors that we actually make. Now, instead of adding something to the prototype like we've done above with add item and remove item, all we need to do in a TypeScript class or an ES6 class, if you've already used them before, is just do this. So this is basically kind of like this. However, we don't use the function keyword. So this is just a public property on our shopping list 2 class. Now again, what we want to do inside of here is pass the item in, and we're going to do this.groceries. And instead of doing this logic, which is this.groceries concat, we could absolutely do this. However, we have something in ES6, which TypeScript also supports, called the spread operator. So all we can do here is create a new array, and we can use ... So this will essentially pass this.groceries into this to create a new array with the groceries inside. However, because we're adding an item, we want to pass the item from the add item into the new array. So it's going to start off with basically merging this new array and adding the item. So each time we call add item, this piece of code gets run and we add the new item to the existing array, which may contain one or more objects. Now, the second thing we have is a remove item function, which also takes a function argument as the item. And all we'll do inside of here is this.groceries equals this.groceries. Now, again, we can use filter, and this is where we did function, and then we passed in the current grocery. And then inside this function call, we did our return statement. So we'll actually do this, and we'll do return item does not equal the current grocery. However, we're going to also learn about ES6 arrow functions. So this is a shorthand way that we can use a function without actually declaring the function keyword, and it automatically sets the this context. So inside of here, we can actually use this dot something. So let's assume we have this dot foo available. If we want to use an arrow function, we can essentially use the lexical this value via an arrow function by doing something like this. So if we needed to access a this property inside of here, we can then go ahead and use the arrow function. Now, there's a really nice feature with arrow functions, which is a shorthand syntax. So I can remove this semicolon, and you see this return statement, we can actually remove this. Now, I'm going to put this on the next line, and this is something called an implicit return. So it's essentially passing in the current grocery, and because we're using an arrow function, we can use this shorthand syntax. So this underneath, all we're doing here is simply return item.grocery. However, when we use this shorthand syntax, we don't actually need to write the word return. It's automatically returned for us. So let's go ahead and create a const. We'll do const and then my new list, and we'll say new shopping list 2. So we're going to go ahead and create a new instance of this shopping list. We can then console log the new list. So above this, we obviously want to go and add some items. So what we'll do is my new list and then add item. This time we're going to add a pear. Then we're going to add a pizza. So inside of the console, we can then go ahead and do .groceries to actually get this array object, which we created here in the constructor. So the main difference between these is that the function in the shopping list acts as a constructor function. If we want to add internal properties, we can create these here. So we have this.groceries as the array. Prototype methods basically live on the actual TypeScript class, and this syntax is a lot cleaner to read. And that's essentially the main differences between the two of these. And all you need to know is essentially that JavaScript functions will now be using ES6 classes, which is what we'll be using throughout this Angular course.